Leads participants are joining from different parts of the country, various states. So with this, again, I, on behalf of the Ramadevi Women's University, I welcome you all to this two-day national webinar on NEP, multidisciplinary NEP 2020. The title of the webinar is NEP 2020 towards inclusivity and multidisciplinarity in higher education. And we had our inaugural session yesterday, and also technical session we have completed yesterday. Two technical sessions we have completed. Professor Hushikesh Senapati was one of the distinguished speakers during session 1, and session 2 we had our speaker Dr. Amarendra Fani, Director Research in Association of Indian Universities. And today morning we had technical session 3 at 11:30 a.m. Professor S.M. Sungu, Professor of Education, Northeastern Hill University, was the speaker in the technical session 3. And this is the technical session 4, come valedictory session. And here, Professor B. Ramesh Babu, Professor and Dean, Research, Regional Institute of Education, NCERT, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, is our distinguished speaker. Here, I would like to request Professor Babu Pati, Department of Computer Science, to chair the session, and along with Professor Pati, the rapporteur, Sir Dr. Manmohan Raut, who is the Physical Education Department, and co-rapporteurs Ms. Kasturi Acharya, B.Ed faculty member, and Ms. Suchi Smita Das will help in the rapporteuring with this, and Sasmita Kara will be the coordinator. So then, after completion of this technical session, there will be valedictory session. With this, I request Professor Pati to take over the session. Now over to Professor Pati.
Namaskar to all. Thank you, Dr. Mohanty, esteemed Vice Chancellor of Ramadevi Women's University, Professor Aparajita Chaudhary Madam, Chairperson PG Council, Professor Sasmita Mohanty Madam, Director College Development Council, and Coordinator IDP, Coordinator and Director IQAC, Dr. Professor Chandi Charan Ratha, all senior professors of Ramadevi Women's University, distinguished speakers, all faculty members, research scholars, and participants present virtually around the globe. It is my pleasure and privilege to chair this session. I welcome all to this interesting session, and this session will be occupied by Professor B. Ramesh Babu. He is one of the eminent professor and Dean Research, Regional Institute of Education, NCERT, Bhopal. He is a very good speaker. He will speak about equity, equality, and accessibility in higher education. So I would like to request Dr. Shankar Prasad Mohanty. He will introduce Professor Ramesh Babu. Hand over to Dr. Mohanty. Please introduce.
Thank you, Professor Pati, for inviting me and giving this opportunity to introduce such a versatile professor of education, Professor B. Ramesh Babu, who is working in the Regional Institute of Education, NCERT, Bhopal. Some background noise is there, I think, is creating problem. So esteemed participants are requested to mute their mics so that background noise will be minimized. Thank you. Thank you for cooperation. So it is my pride privilege to introduce Professor B. Ramesh Babu. Professor B. Ramesh Babu is presently working as Professor of Education in Regional Institute of Education, NCERT, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. He has done his master's degree and doctoral degree from Kakatiya University, Andhra Pradesh, Warangal, in the Indian state of, it is an Indian state of Telangana. To his credits, he has published 6 number of books, several research papers in various journals of international and national international repute. He has delivered several lectures as being the resource persons, like international workshop on learning assessment at primary level, the UNESCO, that is organized by UNESCO and NCERT. And another event is international seminar on constructivist pedagogy in teacher education, that is organized by RI Mysore. He has gone on a study tour to UK, United Kingdom, on international best practices exchange leading to innovation in Sarvasikha Abhijan during 16th January 2013. He is the coordinator of different events, different programs, regional seminar that are on review to review national curriculum frameworks, and is the coordinator of national seminar on constructivism in education. Besides, he is the co-coordinator of seminar on national on girl child's rights and schooling that is organized by RI Bhopal, and many other events he has been contributing as the coordinator. He has completed more than 10 projects implementation on school-based evaluation in Kendra Vidyalaya and state schools in 2005 is one of those. And he has supervised 4 PhD scholars and more than 50 MA dissertations, and he is the member of various committees. That is member of committee to review the teacher education program in the country. That is the most important committee headed by Professor Govinda. That is known as Govinda Committee, and member of advisory committee of revival of heritage of schools constituted by NCERT, and Professor MS Yadav committee is one of the member of that committee, and finally he is the head of the Department of Education RI, and presently he is working as Dean Research RI and continuing days. And his profile is so big, but I am the little man to introduce such a versatile professor. This much I can speak about Professor Ramesh Babu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. So in this session, the moderation will be done by Dr. Sasmita Kaura. She is the coordinator of B.Ed in Ramadevi Women's University. Also, she is the joint secretary of this webinar. And rapporteur, Dr. Monmohan Raut, and co-rapporteur, Ms. Kasturi Acharya and Ms. Suchismita Das. So now I am requesting Professor Ramesh Babu to start this speech. Okay, thank you. Please, Professor Ramesh Babu.
Okay, thank you, Mohanty, for your kind words. And esteemed Vice Chancellor, Aparajita Chaudhary of RDW, and esteemed speakers, starting from yesterday, my erstwhile director, Hrishikesh Senapati, and other esteemed, and all the participants. So at the outset, let me thank the organizers having provided this opportunity to share my understanding about a very important aspect of any education policy or any educational system is the equity and equality and accessibility. We can arrange these 3 terms, 3 words in any way, the way we want. We can begin with accessibility, then go to the equity, and then go to the equality. That could be a process, or vice versa also. There is no issue in that. I have to speak on this or share my understanding rather than calling it as a speaking on this. I prefer to call it as sharing my understanding about these intricately related three aspects of any system, particularly education system. So therefore, the talk that I was asked to present today is equity, equality, accessibility in higher education. Though I love to speak about whole of education. Why this is picked up? Because the backdrop, the contextual backdrop is the National Education Policy 2020. As every one of us know that from yesterday, the people have been speaking about various aspects of NEP 2020. And so therefore, the immediate context for our gathering is to shed light on and try to understand national education policy with regard to equity prescriptions. Because equity prescription becomes very important. So if I look into NEP quickly to give a bird's eye view, NEP, what it talks about, particularly equity. I don't want to go into every other aspect of NEP. I definitely confine only to the equity and equality and accessibility. NEP 2020, if you read the document, maybe 66-page document, a policy statement, maybe more than 20 times at different stages of the policy document, the word equity appears more than 20 times. And whenever and wherever the word equity appears, almost always it appears along with the equity and inclusion. These two always go like a twin brothers or twin sisters. They all go together, equity and inclusion. And if I look into the NEP for our immediate reference, there are two chapters, one in school education, the other one is higher education. Because there are four parts in NEP, and first part with the school education, the second part with the higher education, and the latter two parts with the management, administration, and financial aspects. And chapter 6, at part 1, titled as Equitable and Inclusive Education, Learning for All. This is with regard to school education, and wherein time and again appears the concept of equity and inclusion. And at chapter 14, that is part 2 under higher education, again it talks about equity and inclusion in higher education. And this is under part 2. And in order to understand the way NEP understood equity, the way NEP prescribed the equity policies or strategies, we have to, first of all, I believe as a student of education, I believe that we have to understand what is education after all, not definitional, but the very essence of education. And what is the role of education in any given society. And rather than collecting the role of education from this document and that document, let me straight away collect the role of education in a society at page number 24 NEP, point 6.1. It very categorically states, without any ambiguity, education is the single greatest tool for achieving social justice. There are many aspects at many places in the document, but under the equity and inclusion aspect, the NEP very categorically assigns the role to education vis-a-vis social justice. So education is the single greatest tool for achieving social justice. So therefore, whatever we search in the NEP, we have to search in the light of social justice, because that is the overarching purpose of education, overarching role of the education. And to understand this, let me make certain propositions for the reflection of all the people who are participating in this webinar. My first take on this, in order to understand equity, equality, any other dimension of education, is that I understand always education is a normative activity. This is very fundamental to me to understand the educational process. Education is not simply a cognitive process, a cognitive act. Education fundamentally a normative act. And therefore, whatever we analyze, whatever we measure, whatever we judge, that must be based on the normative intent of the policy. The normative intent of this particular policy, as I just read from the document, is the social justice. So therefore, my first proposition for wider reflection in our normal course of education is a normative act, a normative endeavor. Not only act, it is an endeavor undertaken by the societies from time to time. This is one aspect we have to keep. I time and again come in my 40 minutes talk to this particular dimension. The second proposition which I want to make in order to understand any policy is that education is historical act. Education is a historical act. It cannot be ahistorical. When I say education is historical, we cannot make a educational system or educational processes that suits to 1000 years back. We create an education system that suits to 21st century. And that is why time and again we talk about contemporary 21st century. And in order to meet the demands of 21st century, what kind of educational system we need to create for the mass of people. So therefore, education is, for me, is historical. And when I say normative and historical, and if I go back to the purpose of education, as Vivekananda said, let me take the help of Vivekananda to understand the whole process, is the education is a man-making process. This is very simple, but very crystal clear purpose set by the greatest icon of India, that is education is a man-making process. And very interestingly, almost all the intellectuals of the world in a different way say the same thing. And education is a man-making, however, the man-making is historical. This is the point we have to keep in mind while we rolling out the policies into the society. No doubt in every educational system, starting from Vedic education, if we pick up ancient Indian education, to modern education. If we pick up Greek education system, right from Platonic times to now, every education system always worked for the making of a human being. But the making of human being does not happen in a decontextualized manner. Making of a human always happens in a contextualized manner. That is why I firmly propose that education and man-making is highly historical. And understanding the historicity or historicalness of man-making is very important to construct a curriculum, to pick up a particular syllabus, and to pick up a particular methodology, and to conduct the whole educational process. And why do I say education is historical? Man-making is historical. Because I prepare a man now, 2020, who suits to 21st century, not to the 10th century or to 10th century BC. And in that sense, we have to look at the whole education process as a historical process. Therefore, man-making is historical. And if I keep all these terms in a particular term, which is very popularized by National Curriculum Framework 2005, is education should be contextual. If I use single term for entire thing, education needs to be contextual. It shall not be decontextual. If you formulate policies of education of a particular country, it must be contextually located in that particular country. If you want to prepare a particular curriculum, it must be contextually rooted into that particular place. So therefore, in that sense, education needs to be contextual. And when I talk about equity and equality or accessibility, I have to locate them in the broader context of the education. So therefore, when I say context, what the context is? Context has many dimensions. But being a student of education philosophy, I would look at context in two important aspects. One is every context has present as the context. What is the context. And what ought to be is also a context. Totally, education always operates and always shuttles between is and ought. What is, you have to operate, and what ought to be, you are supposed to operate for that. And put in temporal sense, we work in present and we also work for the future. Education happens in present, but it happens for the future. And therefore, very interesting, for education, the present and the future becomes the context, temporally speaking. If you don't have an eye on the future, which we articulate in the form of purposes of education or aims of education, we will be missing the important aspect. So therefore, what is, you have to understand as a policymaker, as a teacher, and what ought to be, where I have to go from here. I must have an eye on that. So therefore, the context of education is always having is and ought, present and the future, and in certain cases, the past also, because we work with a historical consciousness. And national education policy time and again recalls the Indianization of education. And when we talk of Indianization of education, we time and again refer to the past, the great knowledge systems that flourished in this particular country. So therefore, my second point is that historical needs to be located in the context. And what NEP looks at, what is and what ought. If I replace these two terms with the policy terms, in the language of policy, what NEP describes and what NEP prescribes with regard to equity, equality, and accessibility. What is its descriptive part and what is its prescriptive part? Because as a student of education, I always believe that every policy statement, every policy formulation fundamentally contains two aspects. First of all, it describes what is the situation, wherein it analyzes, it diagnoses the present educational system. On the basis of that, it tries to prescribe in the light of the normative frame. So therefore, what is, that is what it describes and what it prescribed. If I look into that dimension, very interestingly, national education policy, all the policy formulations, almost all the policy prescriptions and descriptions are absolutely based on empirical evidences coming from the field. So with this, if I go into the identifying the context, when we look at the context, context is not static. And let me make this point a little more clear. No context is static. It is always dynamic. And particularly context to education is keep on changing. If we look at the context of higher education in 1950s, when Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Commission report rolled out in 1948. And what was the context to that? And what is the context in 2020 when this particular policy was proposed? The context is completely being changed over a period of 70 years. And if I quickly mention the contextual backdrop to 1950 or 1948 educational commissions and policies, the freedom struggle was a context. And freedom struggle comes out with many aspirations. And constitutional preamble was a particular context. And in this context, there are people's aspirations. That was one of the important contexts. And these contexts mostly driven the educational understanding during 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And after 1990s, the context of education is slowly being changed. And particularly higher education context is being changed. Now the new context is added. There are many dimensions, but one important context which I want to mention here is that the new context that was growing after 1986 precisely, education policy, but after 1990s and after 2000, many changes started taking place in education as a whole, but higher education in particular. The whole nature of higher education is undergoing a drastic change over a period of last 2 decades. If I go back to 1960s, 70s, and 80s, higher education was completely, almost completely under state organization. It was absolutely under public control. But after 2000, after 1990s, because of liberalization policy and many other policies, the nature of higher education started changing. And this becomes a context if you work on a policy now. And therefore, this is the changed context to higher education. And one more important change is happening for last 1 decade is the nature of the knowledge is undergoing a change. Being a students of education, we have to understand education is more and more, knowledge is more and more becoming economic oriented. It is becoming a good. And that is why there are many theories on whether higher education is a public good or private good, merit good or non-merit good or quasi-merit good. And many economists are debating about education. Even educationists are debating about education. And this is one of the important change in the nature of the knowledge. And patent rights increase. Knowledge has become a property right. And the whole culture of intellectual activity becoming a private ownership, private property after 1970s gradually, but after 1990 very rapidly. This is one of the important change that happened during this particular time. And one more important dimension, which is very crucial to understand equity, equality, and accessibility in India is that after 1990, there is no hard and fast cutoff date, but for the sake of understanding, to make a distinction, maybe because after 1990, first generation learners begin to enter into higher education portals. Before 1980, the students who were joining into higher education were not first generation learners. Their parents were already educated. But after 1990, on a big way, the first generation learners started entering into higher education of different sectors, maybe engineering, medicine, university normal courses, general education, every other sector. And sociology of higher education or social composition of higher education is radically changed. And because of universalization of elementary education, there is a huge demand for higher education.
Hello. Good afternoon,
because many students were produced by the school education were looking for.
Meeting the today 5:15 she had called last night Ajanta at 10:30. I had not picked the call. So later I said I'll call you tomorrow because that night 10:30 what I'll talk. So then she said
Participant, please mute. All participants are requested to mute your mic.
So after 1990, the social composition of higher education, because of twin issues or twin developments, not issues, twin developments. One development is the first generation learners, they joined the higher education institutions of different streams. One important implication to equity question. The second important development is because of universalization of school education and near completion of universalization, and most of students were produced from +2, and there was a huge demand, huge pressure on higher education to expand the opportunities, and the accessibility has become little problematic. And because of these developments, very interestingly, these developments certainly inform the policymakers. These developments will certainly creep into the policy prescriptions in one way or the other, either directly or indirectly. So therefore, this was the backdrop to understand the question of equity on equality or accessibility. And because of the pressure on higher education, there was a problem of accessibility to higher education. That is why National Knowledge Commission under Sam Petroda suggested to expand the higher education to meet the demand coming from school education. If you don't expand the opportunities, there will be a big crisis in higher education. And in order to expand the higher educational opportunities, the National Knowledge Commission emphatically proposed to open up the private sector and open up foreign universities to operate in Indian education system. And therefore, we had many bills coming into the parliament, the private university bills in parliament from 2002 onwards. And this is one of the important steps to understand the equity and accessibility. So therefore, this was the context. I call the whole dimensions fall under a particular term, which I call is the context. And with this contextual backdrop, if I look into what is and what ought, and what is accessibility, according to NEP 2020, the reality, the fact is inaccessibility. And how to move from inaccessibility to accessibility, how to make higher education accessible to every aspirant student. And there we have to understand accessibility little deeper. Accessibility in economy is different from accessibility in education. And in order to understand accessibility in education in its true sense, let me talk about at least 3 kinds of accessibility. Virtually every teacher, educator, every teacher, every person who involved in education must look at accessibility in education from a complete different way. One, accessibility. If I say mostly our focus is on the entry level accessibility, and this I call physical accessibility, getting admission into a particular institution. And in order to get admission into a particular institution, I need an opportunity to go to a particular institution. So this accessibility primarily talks about accessibility at entry level. Let me call it as physical accessibility. School must be physically accessible to the child. And because of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in India, school as a physical space, if I call a sociological term, school as a physical space is accessible to every child in India because of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, big schemes. And now we are talking about college as a physical accessibility to every aspirant, university as a physical space to provide accessibility to every aspirant. And this is mostly related to economics of accessibility, because a child is unable to access oneself to higher education, maybe lack of economic criteria. So this is physical accessibility. And this accessibility is the responsibility of the society. And let me bring one more important distinction between school education and higher education, because the distinction is very important to understand the equity as proposed by NEP in education. And not only this education policy, even in 1986 policy and many other intermediary policies. School education by default is a public good and it is right of every child. Article 45 or Article 46 or right to education very categorically states that school education is not a privilege of anybody. It is a universal right of every child. And it is not only the right of child, it is the responsibility of the state to provide opportunities to exercise the right by every child. And in that sense, school education is a fundamental right of every child. But higher education, by its very nature, is not a right. Higher education, school education, very interestingly, by its very definition, by very legal position, it should be inclusive. It cannot be exclusive. It has to provide opportunity to everybody who is coming to the school. You have no right to reject, because school education is a fundamental right of the child. But higher education, which is not as considered by the theoreticians, which is not like school education, is not a fundamental right of every individual who is coming to higher education system. And mostly the higher education by its very nature is selective, because admission into higher education is based on a selection process. But admission into school education is not based on selection process. There is no selection process at all. You have to provide opportunity. And this character of higher education by default makes it as exclusionary. It excludes. And if you look at the Delhi University admissions now, the season begins. 99% students getting a seat into a esteemed college becomes a problematic. And you cannot demand by approaching a college, you have to give to me a seat because it is my right. No, it's your right. In that sense, higher education is not a right. School education is right, fundamental right, whereas higher education is not a fundamental right. Even UNDHR, the 26th article of Universal Declaration of Human Rights also says that by default, higher education is based on the merit. The question of merit comes. Why I am bringing this issue? Because we have to debate this. We have to make a conversation over this, dialogue over this. Equity in absence of inclusion becomes a problematic, because equity goes along with the inclusion. And equity, very interestingly, does not bother about merit in principle. But higher education admission by nature is based on merit. And therefore, how to understand the relationship between equity and merit and inclusion and fundamental right? Actually, there is a tension between these. I think we have to focus our attention here. And then only we can understand what kind of higher education we need to have. How to provide higher education accessible to everybody when everybody's higher education is not everybody's right. So therefore, National Education Policy very rightly describes the descriptive part that there is a lack of accessibility. There is a lack of opportunities to all the children who are coming out of school and want to enter into higher education. So then how to provide accessibility, at least physical accessibility. But being a teacher, my problem is not a physical accessibility, because physical accessibility is a problem addressed by the policymakers or parents or civil society. This is a problem before entering into the institution, in order to enter into the institution. But once they enter into the institution, real accessibility begins. Actually, I want to focus on this. I want to draw your attention to this accessibility. Mere physical presence does not ensure the learning, because children or students are coming to institutions for the sake of learning. And here comes the second important accessibility, which is not given much attention in our discourses, is the not physical accessibility, if I call it as cognitive accessibility. If we give a name to it from the educational jargons, I would call it as cognitive accessibility. If I put a philosophical term here to make it little more laudable, is epistemological accessibility. How far institutions are cognitively accessible to the child. Whether students who are entering into the portals of higher learning institutions, whether institutions are conducive and providing accessibility in cognitive sense, not in physical sense. Once you make a chair and ask a child to sit in the classroom, physical accessibility is gone, that is over. But original accessibility begins, because education fundamentally is a process. I request every teacher, educator who is present here and teacher, let us consider, let us focus education not only as a system, but education is fundamentally a process. And accessibility must be looked at the perspective of process and what is happening in the classroom, and why there are suicides in IIT centers, why students are committing suicides. And very interestingly, very threatening data is coming out. After farmer suicide, the highest number of suicides in India is the student suicide. And why this is happening? I believe one of the important factor is the classrooms are not cognitively accessible to the learner who is sitting in the classroom. And therefore, how to address this particular issue, that is where we have to focus. That is the second important accessibility about which we have to deliberate collectively as a fraternity of teachers. And third accessibility, which is linked to this second one, is the cultural accessibility of the classroom. How far our higher learning centers are culturally accessible to the students. And why I am posing this particular question is that students from different socio-cultural backgrounds with diversified cultural practices are entering into the higher education centers. And when students from diverse cultural backgrounds are coming to classrooms, what kind of cultural accessibility our higher education institutions, in terms of language, in terms of knowledge, in terms of symbol system, in terms of practices, institutional cultural practices, teacher-taught relations, because this appears to be access question, but it is fundamentally an equity question. Equity, not only at physical equity, but cognitive and cultural equity. So therefore, I wish to propose to the August gathering that let us look at accessibility in its fundamental sense in education. Accessibility in agriculture is different from accessibility in education. Accessibility in employment is different from accessibility in education. And therefore, we have to focus more on accessibility during the process, not before entering into the process. And if accessibility, cognitive accessibility is strong, the sustainability, the success of the student, that is what we call outcomes, would be very encouraged. So therefore, this is, I look at access as a student of education. And if I go to the second two other aspects, that is equality and equity, let me quickly deal with this as time is ticking away. Equality, let me not explain it, let me not share my full understanding. In simple terms, equality is an ideal to be achieved. We want to achieve equality. And let me bring here one important aspect. The moment we call a particular aspect as an ideal, it reveals that it is absent in the society. The moment we say there is no, we want to achieve equality, it means there is no equality. And that is what is inequality. What art is the equality. And in order to bring the art, in order to realize the art, that is equality, we have to analyze what is inequality. We have to analyze. Without any delay, without any bias and prejudices, we have to analyze in detail the dimensions of inequality. And need to mention, Indian society is a highly hierarchical and unequal society. National education policy also categorically states about this. And national education policy identified certain dimensions of inequality. And let me quickly read them. There is no need to explain. One inequality, he says, the policy says, gender identity, gender inequality. This is one inequality. The second inequality, if we go into the national education policy, is the socio-cultural identity-based inequality. It calls it as SEDS. The abbreviation is SEDGS, socio-economically disadvantaged. And I wish to draw your attention here. Instead of talking about directly cost-based inequalities, we are bringing, if I use a term, a secular term to denote this inequality. Of course, in bracket, in parenthesis, it is already used, but the focus is not on ascribed cost-based identities. The document very categorically selects a particular neutral secular term to identify the inequality that is in Indian society.
Sir, I admitted, sir.
What happened?
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes. Yes,
Yes.
sir.
So the second inequality dimension that national education policy identifies and writes about is the socio-cultural identities, socio-economically disadvantaged groups. The common term given to within brackets, again, in the process of explanation, it says that SC, OBC, and minorities. Instead of time and again talking about BC, OBC, minorities, it talks about socio-economically disadvantaged groups. This is one important shift in giving a name to a kind of inequality that is very persistent in Indian society. This is second inequality that is there in Indian society. The third one, which is very important, and most of the policy prescriptions are based on this, is the geographical identities, rural-urban division, metropolitan and tribal division. There are region-based inequalities. And very interestingly, this document, instead of calling them as backward districts, it has given a very positive term to them as the aspirational districts. Education in aspirational districts. Wherever education is so poor, it did not call as a backward district, but as an aspirational district. There are aspirations among the people. They want to have accessibility to education, but there is no accessibility. So therefore, we have to address that. And the fourth one is the Divyang, CWSN children or disabled children, or including learning disability. So these are the four major inequality identities identified by the document. Once you come with these identities, the whole prescription goes along with these lines. And in order to overcome this inequity or inequality, what are the equity proposals? And the equity proposals, as I said, based on these four gender-based and socio-cultural, socio-economically disadvantaged groups and geographical identities and disabilities, or CWSN and Divyang, whatever the term you use. So whole equity measures based on this analysis. If you bring in these equity measures based on this and what prescriptions it made, the equity measures. What are the equity measures proposed by the NEP? I quickly go through them without explaining them. The first is special education zones, creation of special education zones. If you recollect, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he was finance minister and prime minister particularly, they created special economic zones. Policy education zone want to create special education zones in wherever access is very less. Creates education zones there. How we create? Maybe PPP model, public-private partnership and philanthropic. There are many models out there. But the proposal is we want to create special education zones to address geographical or regional imbalance and socio-economically disadvantaged group imbalance and other imbalance. And second important prescription is the gender inclusion fund. Because gender identity or gender-based inequalities are very rampant in India. So therefore, gender inclusion fund, creating a gender inclusion fund will be done. And very interestingly, let me mention here, it is the first national education policy or any document in India which taken into account transgender as a part of gender identity. And this is really a radical step in identifying transgender is also at par with other sex.
So therefore, when they talk about gender, very interestingly, and third prescription about Divyang, disabled or differently abled CWSN, and there will be special measures for particular category, and special measures will be taken. The whole list, you don't need to mention. And to make cognitive accessibility. They did not use the cognitive accessibility word, but if we interpret in that sense, establishing school complexes, particularly at school level, for resource mobilization. And these are important equity measures proposed by national education policy. But the question is to be done before I conclude within 3-4 minutes. What questions we have to in our any conversation? If I put certain questions across the table for debates for our future discourses, is to the first question to come to my mind as a teacher in the classroom, because for me, classroom is a process. Classroom is a full of culture. And therefore, the first question we have to ponder over is how to ensure cognitive accessibility to the students who are coming from diverse cultural backgrounds into higher education. Because higher education always appears to be tilted towards elitism, and how to break that. How a tribal child coming from a remote area can be felt cognitively present in the classroom, not physically present, cognitively present, and how to make that accessibility, which determines the outcomes, the learning outcomes. So therefore, this is a major question we have to focus on. Whether a very fundamental systemic question is that, how can we bring inclusive education in exclusionary education system? Our education system at systemic level is becoming very exclusionary. There are multi-layered school system, and now multi-layered higher education system is slowly creeping into education system. Highly unequal educational institutions are coming. And how we create inclusive environment of inclusivity when system is exclusionary? Is it not a basic fundamental contradiction within the education system? And how to address this particular question? The third important question, I think we have to very seriously debate over this, because education, my first sentence read from the document, National Education Policy, is that the objective of education is to realize the social justice. And whether our education system is moving in the direction of realizing the social justice or not. With these educational interventions, is it possible to realize the social justice? I think that is the ultimate question posed by the NEP itself, because that was the fundamental purpose of education. And therefore, are we moving in the direction? And in order to critically reflect on all the prescriptions, right from the first education policy to even now, though jargon is changed, the equity measures, let me take 1 minute on this and conclude. The equity measures in Indian education systems are social category specific policy prescriptions. If I give a sentence to them, all our equity measures, if I club them under equity measures, is that social category specific policy prescription, social category specific policies. If a tribal accessibility is less, let us open a school for tribals. If there is no accessibility for SCs, let us open for a particular intervention for SCs. If there is no accessibility for other group of children, let us open for them. So if you look at Navodaya, meant for rural children. If you look at Ekalavya schools, meant for tribal children. If you look at SC welfare schools in some states, meant for SC children. And this I call a social category specific policy equity measures. Do they realize equality in the society? Because equity is a policy statement or policy strategy meant to realize equality. As long as we have policy prescriptions based on social category specific prescription, whether social categories are rigidified or individuals move out of their social categories. And therefore, these are the questions to be pondered over wherever we go and wherever we sit for conversation. Enlightened arguments, enlightened dialogue between you and me and everybody in order to make India a great nation, in order to make India entering into 21st century with pride. And these are very conflicting and contradictory questions that we have to ponder over, and if possible, come out with solutions. I hope people who are listening to this will certainly consider these ideas wherever they go and put across the table for a better solutions, better answers, so that let us really make our classrooms more equitable, really make our universities more equitable and free institutions. And let us hope our policy implementation would move in that direction. With this hope, I would conclude. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Thank you,
Am I
Professor
audible?
Ramesh Babu.
Am I
you,
audible
Professor
or not?
Ramesh Babu. Yes, yes, it is audible. Thank you, Professor Ramesh Babu. Really, this is very nice and interesting and impressive session. You have described initially the essence of education and role of education from page number 24 of NEP, point 6 and 6.1. Really very interesting regarding cognitive process and cognitive act. And nicely described about the statement of Vivekananda, education is a man-making process. Really, it is very interesting, and man-making is historical. So overall, there is a big thank to you for this interesting session. So there is a small announcement. Due to the technical internet problem, Professor Hrusikesh Senapati, the former director of NCERT New Delhi, was unable to conclude his session yesterday. So now I am requesting Professor Senapati to deliver his talk and discuss. Professor Senapati, please join. And along with, I am also inviting Dr. Sasmita Kaura to handle the session. Professor Senapati, please join.
Namaskar.
Yes.
Sir, namaskar, sir.
Namaskar. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Sir, good evening from Ramesh.
Yes, good evening. This is a good opportunity to meet through this webinar. So I think most of the things I completed yesterday, but because of some technical problem, I could not conclude. What I feel yesterday, we are discussing about the outcome-based curriculum that already I have completed. But just we are discussing about the assessment. How should we assess? Because one thing I would like to highlight that we may prepare very good curriculum. Curriculum may be outcome based, and our pedagogy may be very effective. But if there is no change in the process of assessment, then nothing will happen. And if really we want to change in the system, we want our children to become more creative, more innovative, and we want they to develop the critical thinking, communication skills, and then we have to bring about change in the process of assessment. And what policy has recommended that assessment should be very systematic, very scientific, and it should be that there should be continuous, comprehensive evaluation in higher education also. That has been mentioned in the policy, because in assessment, just yesterday we were discussing, there are three modes of assessment. In policy also, it has been highlighted. One is assessment of learning, another is assessment for learning, third one is assessment as learning. And when we're talking about this assessment, because assessment of learning, we all are familiar, and we assess at the end just to know what is the performance, and accordingly we give some judgment. And assessment for learning, we just conduct the assessment in between, and just to monitor learning and to guide the instruction and to provide some intervention, some remedial measures to the students, so that they can cope with the situation and they can learn effectively. But now the concept of assessment as learning, that is most important for all of us. And here, when we say assessment as learning, what we are doing, we are giving opportunity to the learners to reflect upon their learning. And for the first time, it is recommended in the policy that students should be involved in the process of assessment. When we are saying assessment as learning, assessment is an integral part of teaching learning, and students should be involved in the process of assessment. And there should be peer assessment, there should be self-assessment, there should be assessment by the teacher. And policy has also highlighted that there should be 360-degree assessment. And when we are discussing all these, that we have to take care of this assessment as learning, and when we are going to assess the competencies, we have to take care of this, and on that we can do through rubrics and portfolio. That in school education, that has clearly it has been defined. We are going to develop holistic progress card. Holistic progress card on the very because when we are preparing the progress card, and progress card we are mentioning the mark what they have secured, and when they are going to the next class, they are going with that mark. But that is not the description of the child or the learner from a holistic point of view, because now we are talking of the holistic education. And in holistic education, that means all aspects should be taken care of. And when we are talking about this assessment as learning, that means we are giving opportunity to the student to reflect. Then when we are deciding the criteria, how they are going to assess, that students should be involved. And in consultation with the students, we should decide the criteria, and we should also give them the opportunity to assess themselves. Once they assess, they get opportunity to assess themselves, they can know their strength and their weakness, and they will get opportunity to reflect upon their own learning, and that will bring about a change. And that is why, if really we want to change in higher education, that by conducting this assessment at the end or in between some assessment, that we cannot achieve the goal. That is why policy has recommended that we should go for this continuous and comprehensive evaluation. And what that was also mentioned in 86 policy. And in 86 policy, we also implemented, I remember in our DM school also, it was implemented MLL, and that at that time we had divided this, that these are the cognitive and these are the non-cognitive. But now that is gone. We have made it competency based. One competency includes everything. It's the ability to perform a task successfully. It includes the knowledge, it includes the skills, it includes the attitude, and everything. So that it is very comprehensive. So that to assess the competency, we have to develop portfolio, and that is the need of our. And the portfolio is very comprehensive in nature, and it will include all the activities. And really, we want that they should develop their communication skill, because now we have shifted our focus from product oriented approach to process oriented approach. In process oriented approach, to assess that what the students are learning is not important, how they are learning, that is more important. And when you say how they are learning, how they are collaborating, how they are sharing, how they are interacting, how they are initiating, and how they are leading. So all these things should be assessed. And we are not going to assess the only performance of the only individual learner. We are going to assess their performance in a group. What the group is doing, what the individual is doing, how they are sharing, how they are participating. That is most important, because we ultimately want to develop the spirit of cooperation. What is the what we need in a democratic country, not competition. So that is why we have to develop rubrics in consultation with the students, and there should be a continuous assessment from the beginning. And it should be an integral part of teaching learning, and we have to also develop portfolio. By doing that, we can bring about change we bring out a reform in higher education, and we can make curriculum outcome based, and we can integrate assessment with teaching learning, and we can assess all the competencies of the students in a very systematic and scientific way, and we can involve students in the process of assessment, and we can make our classroom process more vibrant, and we can provide opportunity to our student to participate, to stay. That is the most important thing, because now what it is, we go to the class, deliver lecture, and students are passive listeners. We want to make them active learners, and we want to bring about change in the classroom process. And we can do all this if we bring about change in the process of assessment, and that is the need of our, that has been recommended by the policy also, and that we should do. Because other things I have already discussed. I know you have limited time, and now it is open. If you have some questions, I can answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Potti, I think you can request the moderator to take over the session and continue the question and answer part.
Thank you, sir, very much for concluding the speech today.
Professor Potti, we can go to the question answer and moderation, I think.
Dr. Susmita Kaur, are you there?
I'm here, sir.
Yes,
Please continue.
I'm not all. As the co-organization of this two-day webinar, I have never been as happy as I feel today because of working as a moderator among two eminent personalities in the intellectual horizon of education. One, Professor Hrusikesh Senapati, former director, NCERT New Delhi, and another, Professor Ramesh Babu, Professor and Dean, Research, Regional Institute of Education, Bhopal, NCERT. One for presenting a paper on equity, equality, and accessibility in higher education, that is by Professor Ramesh Babu, and another beautiful session by Professor Hrusikesh Senapati on outcome-based curriculum in higher education. So, sir, there are a number of queries since yesterday for Professor Senapati, and in today's session for Professor Ramesh Babu. More than 200 people were watching our live YouTube yesterday and today too. One question, when Professor Senapati was pointed out that there should be the involvement of students for continuous and comprehensive assessment. Students should be involved from the very beginning so that they will be able to know their strengths and weaknesses. And there is a question regarding competency-based assessment in higher education. So the person wants to know that how can we ensure competency-based assessment in higher education? This is a question for Professor Senapati, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is a very relevant question because now what we are doing, actually now our system is mostly, it is lecture dominated, and we try to deliver lecture, and we try to transact the curriculum, some content what has been prescribed in the syllabus and curriculum. And by doing that, what we are doing, we are helping our student to acquire the some discipline specific knowledge, and that they are doing, but they are doing it as a passive listeners. But what we want that our curriculum should be processed, that means outcome based. When we say outcome based, we are talking about the learning outcome. What skills, what competencies we expect from our students when they will go from one class to the next class, and when they will be completing the course, and what they will come out with, what skills and competencies. And in higher education, it is not only the generic competency we are talking, and sometimes also occupational competency. Sometimes it is knowledge specific, competent, discipline specific, and program specific, course specific. So all these we have before starting the program, we have to define the competency. That is the first criteria that we have to do. Once we are in a position to define it, we are sure that all these we expect from our students when they will be completing the course, and they will acquire mastery over these competencies. Once we decide that, we can select content keeping in view the competencies. But now what we are doing, we are selecting content because we're seeing and looking into the quality of the content, because this content is very good, and that's why it should be included in the curriculum or included in the syllabus. But what we have to do, we have to do the reverse. We have to see the competency. What competency we expect from our students, keeping in view those competencies, those outcomes, we have to decide the content. If that content is going to help in the development of the particular competency, then that should be included in the curriculum. And after including it in the curriculum, then how to assess? Can we assess by conducting the year-end exam? Can we assess these competencies by conducting exam in between just to monitor learning? So that is a question. Now that is why what research says. Research says if students are involved in the process, then they will be very active. So we have to involve students, we have to engage them in teaching learning process, and they should know how they are going to be assessed. They should know what are the criteria we have fixed for their assessment. And that is why it has been recommended that there should be peer assessment, there should be self-assessment, there should be assessment by the teachers. And students should be involved in the process of assessment. Till now, we are not involving our students in the process of assessment. So this is a paradigm shift. If students are involved, if once they know the criteria, then they can assess themselves, they can know their strength and weakness, and accordingly they will prepare, and that will bring about a change. And that is why in policy it should be continuous, because focus is on assessment as learning. Let our students reflect on their learning. What is their strength, they should know. What is their weakness, they should know. And let them reflect on that. And continuously, they should get feedback from their peers, from their friends, and also from the teachers. That is why we say it is a continuous process. It is an integral part of teaching learning. If we can do that, and that we cannot do by conducting the test once at the end or in between some tests, that we can do by making this assessment continuous. We have to use not only the testing techniques, we have to use the non-testing technique. It is not because we are going to assess the competencies, and when we say competencies, we are going to assess their knowledge, we are going to assess their skills, we are going to assess their attitude, that value. That means what type of all these in a holistic manner we are going to assess. That is why we have to involve students, and we have to identify the competencies, and we have to make it continuous, and we have to come out with the portfolio, because portfolio will take care of all the competencies, and that what they are doing, how they are participating, how they are sharing, that process part. That is more important, because now we put a lot of emphasis on process. If you can strengthen the process, ultimately the product will be good. Because earlier it was product oriented, now say it is process oriented. Once the process is strengthened, then product will be. If we can help our student to develop their critical thinking, If we can help them to collaborate, cooperate, share, and get opportunity to innovate, and that means we are promoting the divergent thinking. We are making them more creative. We are making them more innovative, and we are encouraging them to take initiative to lead. If that type of environment we expect and we want that the classroom should be like that, it should be more vibrant, it should be more process oriented, so that we can do that. And that for that we have to take the help of this portfolio. We have to take the help of rubrics, and jointly students and teachers, that in collaboration with the student teacher, can develop the rubrics, and that can be used by everybody, by students and by teachers and any group, so that it will be very vibrant and very collaborative in nature, and that will bring about change in the system, and that we can implement in higher education. There is no issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, during the course of his lecture, what I have understood from Professor Ramesh Babu's presentation, I could summarize it in one line. There is equity goes along with inclusion. Now, sir, there is a question asked by Dologovinda Sahu, who wants to know that will exclusion of MPhil degree negatively affect the inclusion of quality research in PhD degree? This is a question for Professor Ramesh Babu. Will the exclusion of MPhil degree is going to affect the inclusion of quality research in PhD degree?
I think Ramesh sir, there's some technical, some internet issue. So Ramesh sir.
Then may I request Professor Senapati sir to address the issue, please, sir?
Oh, I could not. Can you repeat that? I have not.
Yes, the question is whether the exclusion of MPhil degree is going to negatively affect the research in PhD degree.
Oh, actually, this is a decision by the policy, that means the committee, core committee of the policy. They have taken this decision after consultation, because before formulating the policy, a lot of consultation has been made. And now you see in higher education, the model what has been proposed, a lot of flexibility. After 4 years, one can join for the PhD. And after completion of 5 years, also one can join PhD integrated program. And after completion, master, a lot of flexibility is there. And that the MPhil, what is being taught in MPhil, that will be an integral part of the PhD program, and there will be no loss, and it is not going to affect negatively, because to save time. I think we are doing, and honest is that another degree that may not be the requirement now, because we can integrate with the PhD. Ultimately, MPhil leads to the PhD. And in some universities, they say that this is the coursework, and that is also part of the MPhil. So like that, so that is why policy, they have taken decision after a lot of deliberation, and I think it is not going to affect negatively. That is my observation.
As I came to know, sir, the internet connection has been facing some problem with Ramesh Babu sir. So Dr. Koro, sir came now.
Okay.
I think we can go to concluding session. Professor Mahanti.
Any other question is there for Ramesh sir?
No more question is there for Ramesh sir. Yeah.
Okay. Ramesh sir came. Okay.
Yeah, one question is there for Professor Ramesh sir. There is a question. Yeah.
Yes, Ramesh sir is there. Madam okay. Kaur, madam, please ask.
So one question is there from Vijay Kumar Das. how should we weigh formal, non-formal, and informal learning experiences when assessing and crediting prior learning?
So I think that problem continues with the internet. So we may proceed, Professor Patti.
Okay.
Yes, better we can go for next session, our validation session. So thank you, Professor Senapati, for your nice this speech. Assessment is very much required in the policy, and yes, students should involve in this assessment, and this is possible through rubrics only. So thank you, Professor Senapati. So with this, we can conclude this session and join in the validation session. I would like to invite Professor.
Internet disconnection, so we are.
I would like to invite Dr. Shankar Prasad Mohanty to start the next session, validation session. Thank you. Thank you all participants. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Dr. Sasmita Kara, for moderating this session. Thank you. Hand it over to Dr. Mohanty.
Please, Shankar Babu.
Dr. Mohanty, please unmute.
Unmute your mic.
And continue the next session.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
No? Okay.
Yes,
So thank you, Professor Patti, for nicely managing the session, the technical session 4, and Professor C.K. Senapati and Professor B. Ramesh Babu were the distinguished speakers of the session. So now, as per the agenda, as I was instructed to tell about the concluding remarks of the 2 days national webinar. Though let me wind up within 2 minutes, 1 minute. The webinar was inaugurated yesterday at 11:15 a.m. by Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Aparajita Choudhury Madam, Professor Sasmita Mohanty, Chairperson PG Council, Professor Chandi Charanaratha, Director IQAC, Director College Development Council and IDP Coordinator, and Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Aparajita Choudhury Madam all delivered inaugural speech based on NEP 2020 and its implementation in higher education. The technical session started at 11:30. And Professor C.K. Senapati, former Director NCERT New Delhi, delivered his talk on outcome-based curriculum and assessment reforms in higher education. The talk was moderated and concluded by Dr. Manas Behera, the head HOD Political Science of this university, in a lucid manner. The questions were addressed by Professor Senapati today due to some technical issues during technical session 1. The participants, including me, learned about many things, that is outcome-based curriculum and types of assessments such as assessment of learning, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. As Professor Patti told, the assessment can only be possible. It is only one approach is rubrics. And in technical session 2, Professor Amarendra Fani, Director Research, Association of Indian Universities, delivered the talk on NEP 2020, Transforming the Landscape of Higher Education Research, in which Dr. Pani enlightened us the exact status of research in the country compared to other countries. He suggested for more investment out of the GDP in research particularly, and the questions were addressed very nicely by Professor Fani in a very lucid manner, and Dr. Manas Behera was also moderating the session. And the technical session 3 started today Professor S.M. Sungo from Northeastern Hill University talked on institutional restructuring and consolidation in a very vivid manner. That was highly appreciated by all the participants. The institutional restructuring was discussed and solutions were also discussed. Questions were addressed by Professor Sungo. Sasmita Kara, the faculty member of the department, was moderating. And the technical session 4, the distinguished speaker was Professor B. Ramesh Babu from RI Bhopal, that is a constituent unit of NCERT. And he talked on equity, equality, and accessibility in higher education. And from the point of historical point of view, how the equity and equality and accessibility is essential. That was discussed in a very vivid manner. And finally, we are at the stage of valedictory session. One more thing I would like to add before valedictory talk. I express under the entire sessions, what is the statistics of the participants. More than 400 participants were participating in the entire webinar, entire sessions, including Zoom platform, as well as that YouTube live streaming. I express thankfulness to all the dignitaries for guiding to make the program a grand success. A special thanks to Professor Chandi Charanarath, Director IQAC, for his active guidance from the day number 1, from when we are preparing the budget, starting from budgeting, flyer making, program schedule, and everything. The Professor Rath was guiding us, and finally the program became successful. And I'm thankful to Professor Sasmita Mahanti, Chairperson PG Council, and Honorable Vice Chancellor, the esteemed Vice Chancellor, our backbone of the university. And without her support, nothing, this program could not be successful. Thanks to all. So with this, I request Professor Sasmita Mahanti, Chairperson, PG Council of Ramadevi Women's University, to deliver his valedictory address. Professor Mahanti.
Thank you, sir. Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Aparajita Chaudhary, esteemed speakers of this two-day event, the organization team members, my fellow dear participants. So this 2 days event that was concluded right now was really very engaging. We listened to 4 very good talks by our esteemed speakers. Professor Hrusikesh Senapati, he talked on outcome-based curriculum and assessment reforms in higher education. Dr. Amarendra Pani spoke on NEP 2020, transforming the landscape of higher education research. Professor S.M. Sungo talked on institutional restructure and consolidation. And lastly, Professor B. Ramesh Babu talked on equity, equality, and accessibility in higher education. I won't go into the details of the NEP 2020, but I would like to rather summarize what we learned and how we can change at the university level and at the individual level that would make us truly adopt NEP 2020. As I understand, the very important step is to restructure the curriculum to make it interesting, updated, outcome-based, open, and flexible. The curriculum should be made so as to introduce, made in such a way so as to introduce the scientific temper and inquisitiveness among the student. The curriculum should also take into account the local flavor as well as the global citizenship. The teaching is to be responsible and of quality to raise the interest and involvement among the students. The inclusivity and equity can be achieved if a teacher reaches to the mass by taking care of conceptually poor students as well as promoting the good students. That can be achieved through, for example, teaching in local languages and proper counseling. As Professor Ramesh Babu told, a teacher has to provide, rather university has to provide the cognitive and cultural accessibility to students to have a better outcome. The employability can also be generated by introducing more of vocational as well as skill-based courses. On the research front, we have to formulate a comprehensive research policy or plan at the university level that focuses on building of a research ecosystem with more application-oriented research and research that goes from lab to land. Research that collaborates with the industry and other prominent institutions around the state and outside the state and abroad. All the faculty should be encouraged to get highest degree, and they should be periodically update themselves to be abreast with latest developments and be more experienced to motivate their students. The university has to, of course, the university has to provide all necessary logistics and provide hand-holding support so that the researcher goes hassle-free and a good researcher be awarded accordingly. Being the state university, we face so many challenges, be it paucity in staff, in funding, etc. So truly implementing NEP 2020 is a daunting task. But as Madam Sungo said, we can take small steps at a time and take steps to implement NEP phase-wise. We need to decide which kind of university we want to be and plan and execute accordingly. The basic objective of this NEP 2020 is to educate all, irrespective of background, gender, social, and financial status, and produce the next generation workforce that will be self-sufficient to sustain themselves without being burdened to the society and country as a whole. So it's everybody's responsibility to see that the policy achieves its goal so far as the quality and effectiveness is concerned. I take this opportunity to thank profusely to the esteemed speakers for such enlightened talks and congratulate the organizers for conceptualization of such a wonderful event. It was really a privilege for me, and I think I'm sure for all of us, for being part of this webinar. So finally, stay well and stay safe. Thank you all. Dr. Mohanty, over to you, I think. You are muted. You unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Sasmita Mohanty, Madam, for a nice talk to the dignitaries, for the dignitaries in valedictory session. So with this, we are coming to the end of the all sessions. So now I would like to request Dr. Ashok Kumar Digal, the faculty member of the department, to express a formal vote of thanks, and the meeting will be over later on.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Digal.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to one and all present in the national webinar on NEP 2020. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Ramadevi Women's University, Professor Aparita Chaudhary, Madam, esteemed Chairperson, PG Council, Professor Sasmita Mohanty, Madam, respected HOD and faculty members of different department of Ramadevi Women's University, Bhubaneswar, respected chairperson of the today's program, Dr. Vibhudanti Pati sir, respected research person of the today's program, Professor B. Ramesh Babu, Professor Hrusikesh Senapati sir, respected Director CDC, Director IQAC and Coordinator of IDP, Professor Chandichana Rath sir, respected invited guests, resource person, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure, it is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion, that is end of the 2 days national webinar on NEP 2020. Sir, a leader is a good when his presence is felt. A leader is a better when his absence is felt. A leader is a best, neither her presence, neither absence is a matter. It means the system, the department, institution running its own way. Because the able leadership quality of the head of the institution. Although the person who is head of our institution, Ramadevi Women's University, she is not presenting here, but the department, the system is running its own way because of her able leadership quality. And today, we are proud privilege to give vote of thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor. Without her present, the program is running systematic. And it is my sincere thanks and gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, because without her support, the program could not have been successful one. Thank you, Madam, for your valuable support, cooperation, and time-to-time guidance to make the program successful one. I extend my sense of appreciation and gratitude for our beloved chairperson, and she is not only the chairperson of PG Council, Ramadevi Women's University, but she is also a queen of academy building, Ramadevi Women's University. And she is popularly called Professor Sasmita Mahanti Madam. Madam, I really extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks for your support for conducting these 2 days national webinar in this pandemic situation. Thank you, Mahanti Madam. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Professor Vibhudanti Pati sir. In spite of his busy and hectic schedule, he keep our request, and that way he act as a chairperson and manage the whole session in a systematic and effective manner. It was really mind-blowing and heart-touching one. So once again, I extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Vibhudanti Pati sir. Now, I would like to extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks the Center of Attraction and Research Person of the today's program, Professor B. Ramesh Babu sir. Sir, the topic itself one of the debatable one, because the topic was equity, equality, accessibility in higher education. No doubt, the topic itself is debatable in context of a country like India, but in spite of all, from different dimension, different angle, the way we presented and covered the topic, it was a really wonderful and very, very interesting and meaningful one. And Professor Babu highlighted the many issues on his topic, like historical point of education, rights of education, equity and inclusive education, higher education versus merit, fundamental rights and education. Education is not a system, rather it is a fundamental process. Socioeconomic inequality and geographical barrier, children with special needs, and we may call it as Divyang, gender inequality versus transgender, different national education policy, cognitive process, and education is man-making process. Sir, during your presentation, we observed your presentation was very systematic, informative, and knowledgeable one. And we hope and believe, definitely, we request you in our coming days for this such kind of program. Thank you, sir, for your beautiful presentation in this 2 days national webinar. Now, I would like to extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to another resource person, Professor Hrusikesh Senapati. If you count the few teachers, those who have a significant contribution in the field of education, then definitely, undoubtedly, Professor Hursikesh Senapati is one among them. Because I have no words how to express his personality, his contribution towards the education. Because although he's a man of visa, but he have a name and fame across the country, across the world, because of his significant contribution. Sir, due to your technical problem, you are unable to complete the in first day, but in spite of all, your discussion, your presentation is really lucid one, interesting one, and informative one. So once again, on behalf of Department of Education and in collaboration with IPD Ramadevi Women's University, I extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to Professor Senapati sir. Now, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Sasmita Kaur, Assistant Professor of Education, for her outstanding and systematic moderation skill during the technical session and make the technical session lively and successful one. Friends, a dream does not become a reality from magic. A dream does not become a reality from magic. It takes its own time, sweet memory, determination, and hard work. And yes, it is believed endorsed by our beloved HOD, and he is not only the head of the Department of Education, but also organizing secretary. Sir, we wholeheartedly extend my gratitude to our beloved HOD sir, Dr. Shankar Prasad Mohanty, for his support and guidance for organizing such a wonderful program. Thank you, sir, for your assistance, guidance, and encouraging to all of us. We have been fortunate enough to your support for making this program a successful one. Now, I extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to the Director of CDC, Director of IQAC, and Coordinator of ITP, Ramadevi Women's University, the most senior faculty members of Ramadevi Women's University, and he is none other than Professor Chandicharan Ratha sir. Sir, from pre-planning to up to the closing, from each and every point, each and every stage, the way you motivated us, the way you encouraged us, it was really mind-blowing and very, very interesting one, sir, and a memorable one. So once again, I extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to Professor Ratha sir for your motivational words to make the program successful one. And once again, I would like to extend my gratitude and special thanks to Advisory Committee, basically Professor Chandicharan Ratha sir, Director IQAC and CDC, Professor Madhusmita Pati, Department of English, Professor Jyotirmoy Acharya, Department of Gender Studies, Dr. Vibhudendra Pati, Department of Computer Science, Dr. Rajkumar Joshi, Department of Biotechnology, Dr. Debobola Swai, Department of Computer Science, Dr. Manas Behra, HOD, Department of Political Science, for their significant contribution, cooperation, and time-to-time suggestion to make the program resounding one. I express my most sincere thanks to Dr. Suprit Panigrai, Assistant Professor of Gender Studies, for his tireless effort and technical support to make the webinar a grand success. Sir, I'm really thankful for your technical support, because without your technical support, I think we could not be able to make it a grand success. Thank you, Panigrai sir. I extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to all the faculty members, all the HOD and faculty members of different departments of Ramadevi Women's University for their cooperation, coordination, and time-to-time suggestion to make the program successful one. And last but not least, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Manmohan Raut, rapporteur of the today's program, Mrs. Kasturi Acharya, Suchit Mita Das, co-rapporteur, to act as a bridge between moderator and participant in preparing the document for grand success of the National Webinar on NEP 2020. Last but not least, the essence of fruit is always tested. The essence of fruit is always tested in the last, and we believe that the last will be the best. Last but not the least, this event would not have been successful without the participation of wonderful participants. So I extend my gratitude and heartfelt thanks to all the participants, teachers, teacher educator, research scholar, ladies and gentlemen, for their active participation, cooperation, and good interaction in different sessions to make the program successful one. And once again, I extend my gratitude to all the dignitaries, invited guests, research person, ladies and gentlemen, for your cooperation and coordination to make the program successful one. Thank you, Bande Utkal Janani.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok Kumar Digal sir. So now the time has come to make the program over. So it is my sincere request to the coordinator IDP, under whose collaboration this seminar was organized. Professor CG, no, not other than Professor Chandi Charanratha. So to declare the webinar over.
Thank you, Professor Mahanti. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Aprita Chaudhary, in absentia, Chairperson PG Council, Tasmita Mahanti, esteemed speakers, dear participants, we have seen the threadbare discussion of this two-day national webinar on NEP 2020 towards inclusivity and multidisciplinarity in higher education. We had a tough task, a threadbare discussion, an enlightened outcome. At the end, I declare this today's webinar to be over and closed. Bande Utkal Janani.
Thank you. Thank you all the dignitaries. Senapati sir, Samastung Namaskar, Madam Sosmita Madam, Samastung Namaskar. Program, we completed the program successfully. We will meet
with all blessings of Honorable Vice Chancellor and cooperation of our senior colleague CPGC, Chairperson PG Council, Sasmita Mahanti. We cannot forget her.
Yes. Madam, in absentia, I am thankful to Vice Chancellor Madam. Again, we are meeting in some other program. Thank you all. Namaskar.
Sir, what about feedback form? Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, sir. What
feedback
about
form, feedback form will be sent in WhatsApp and your email ID by today evening or tomorrow morning.
Okay, sir. Many people are asking for that.
Yes. Due to a lot of hectic program, it could not be done. So it will be done by today evening or by today morning.